Welcome to the Book Show, a celebration of reading and writers. I'm Joe Donahue. Novelist Danielle Trussoni is the author of the bestsellers Angelology and Angelopolis. She now gives readers a thrilling ride with her latest, The Puzzle Master. When Mike Brink, an ingenious and prolific puzzle maker, receives a call from a local prison psychiatrist seeking his help with an inmate whose only form of communication in the 5 years since her arrest for a murder is a perplexing puzzle, he gets pulled into a whirlwind of mystery. What begins as a simple desire to crack this strange cipher quickly morphs into an urgent and dangerous hunt for the truth. And Mike Brink finds himself facing the God Puzzle, a cryptic ancient prayer circle along with powerful forces that he can't escape. Again, the name of the new novel is The Puzzle Master, and it's a great pleasure to welcome Danielle Trussoni to this week's book show. Thank you very much for being with us. A pleasure to speak with you again.
Oh, Joe, it's a pleasure to speak with you, too.
This is a book that I started hearing about when the galleys first went out earlier this year from my book friends telling me what a terrific read it was. And it took me about 2 weeks of nudging from them, and I read it and fell in love with it. I'm wondering how much you think that this is a different type of book for you.
I think it's a completely different type of book for me. I would say that this is my first thriller. There are some elements of other genres. There's some historical moments in the book. There is a little bit of, some scary scenes as well. But I would say overall this is a thriller, whereas my previous books, sort of walking the line between literary fiction and, a more fast-paced story. But this one is really fast, and I fell in love with the concept of a man who could solve puzzles and bring readers with him along that path. And once I started writing it, it just felt like it needed to be a thriller.
In writing a thriller, you have fast bursts of chapters, and it keeps the momentum up that way. You're bringing us to and fro, back in time, flashing us forward. So there is just a quickness in that approach as well.
Totally. And I think the difference between, a thriller and a sort of literary novel is that my main character really wants something. And every chapter in the book is about Mike Brink, this character, getting closer and closer and closer to the solution to what he wants. Just to set it up for people a little bit, like you did in the beginning, Mike Brink is an ingenious puzzle constructor, but he's also suffering. It's not like he's just great at puzzles, He is suffering from something called savant syndrome. In high school, he was a football player. He had a traumatic brain injury, and he developed this disorder, which is an actual disorder that I discovered when I started researching, that allows people to develop a skill that they didn't have before. So, for example, some people who have savant syndrome, they're injured, and then a couple of weeks later, they suddenly are amazing at learning languages. They could learn like Korean or Chinese in a couple of days, something like that. And there are about 50 documented cases of this in the world, so it's a real thing. But so this character, Mike Brink, has this, and how it manifests with him is a facility with higher math, patterns, puzzles. He has a photographic memory. He can read something and never forget it. And he's sort of tortured by this, right? I think that we think, oh, if you're very talented and have a skill like that, it's going to be great. You can get through life easily. But for him, it's really kind of traumatic. And so what he wants throughout this book is the relief of solving puzzles, and in particular the one that Jess Price, this woman in the prison, draws for him, and the one that puts him on this journey.
And what is interesting about that is, unlike most of the puzzles that he comes in contact with, where he is able to solve them very quickly, this is something that is stymieing him to the point of, as he finds out more information, the pieces start to come together, and obviously learns that there's a much larger puzzle at work as well.
Absolutely. And I think, just this is my behind the book, the inspiration for me to write a book like this. Is that I feel like writing a novel and actually narrative is very much like a puzzle. So it's a little bit autobiographical in some ways, right? Like I write because I like to put the pieces together and I have a compulsion to do that. And so writing about a character who needs to see it all come together and see the larger picture was really thrilling and exciting and a lot of fun.
How much did you know about puzzles going in, and what was that research like?
So I knew very little. I'm like a lot of people. I do Wordle and crosswords sometimes, and I do the spelling bee. I love that sort of thing. But I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm also really quite bad at math. So I needed help. Once I realized that this main character was going to be a puzzle genius, I got in touch with Will Shortz, who people know from NPR, and he's also the editor at the New York Times Games page. And I asked him if I could just talk to him about what it meant to be in your head like that, and someone who does puzzles every day, basically all day. He invited me to his house and showed me his puzzle library, which was absolutely incredible. It like filled a whole space in his house, and he has these amazing antique puzzles. And he gave me insight into what that was like. I don't think I could have written this character if I hadn't been able to imagine just how full someone like Will Shortz's mind is with puzzles. It really makes a big difference in writing to have that kind of information.
Danielle Trussoni is our guest on this week's book show. The name of the new novel is The Puzzle Master, and it is published by Random House. Mike works for the New York Times, making puzzles and creating puzzles. And I guess we think of those as one thing, like that is one thing, whether it be Wordle or whether it be a crossword puzzle. And then there's this whole other realm of puzzledom, isn't there? That is much more mathematical, is much more cerebral, that is, quite frankly, beyond most of us.
Totally. That's the thing about Mike Brink's talent is it isn't just, he can do a crossword in an hour or, 10 minutes or whatever. He has an extraordinary ability to see patterns where other people don't. And in the book, he undergoes a lot of medical attention, and his doctor explains to him how it works. And Mike Brink has synesthesia as a result of his accident. People with savant syndrome also, not everybody, but many of these people also develop synesthesia. And that's, when the senses cross. So, for example, you hear a sound and you see a color, or you read a letter and you taste something. It's a kind of mixing up of the senses. And he has this strange sensation when he's solving puzzles and when he's doing these sort of complicated equations, and it draws him forward. So, yeah, it's really different. And that's what was fascinating to me about this character, is that it speaks about human consciousness, what we're capable of, where all of this information comes for us, and really brought me deeper into the nature of what it was like to be human. And so this character is really compelling for me, enough so that I'm writing a second book about him right now.
It seems that as you write about him, there are a couple of scenes in the book where he is very lonely. There's difficulty in personal connection, which is where Jess comes in, the aforementioned Jess, who he starts to connect with, which is almost immediate.
Right. So Jess is the woman in the prison who drew the puzzle that brought Mike into this mystery. And he's used to feeling disconnected from people. I was interested in writing about him partially because of that disconnection. But when he meets her, these walls between him and other people seem to crumble. And he feels an immediate connection with her, whether it's because it's through a puzzle or not, I don't know. But he does feel that connection. And for him, it's life-changing because he's spent a lot of time really wanting to feel connected to another person, especially a woman. And so, yeah, she pulls him in. And that connection, that relationship really moves throughout the novel and is part of the the ending, the solution to the puzzle.
I find books like yours fascinating because the title of it is The Puzzle Master, and obviously puzzles are throughout it, and it establishes itself as a book primarily about puzzles and the impact the puzzles have on these characters. And then all of a sudden I find myself thinking, wow, I know a lot more about porcelain than I ever thought I would know.
Okay, I have to laugh at that. Yeah, yes. It's a rabbit hole that I went down. There's a whole thread in the solving of this mystery that takes the reader through time and through a lot of sort of particular elements of porcelain making, because the puzzle was discovered by Jess Price in sort of, I don't want to give too much away, but it has to do with a porcelain doll. And this porcelain doll sort of carried this puzzle from the 19th century Prague, where it was constructed, to the present moment. And all of that is excavated throughout the book. And readers go, I think readers go into places they don't expect to go, which I personally find really fun. I also am someone who loves research, and I love learning things when I read. So the book is filled with information about, for example, the history of porcelain. It also has information, for example, about the history and the mystical nature of the Kabbalah. And there's lots of little rabbit holes that I went in and that I included for readers. The most important part of it, though, of constructing the sort of complicated network of information that creates the puzzle context, is that it's fun. So I, tried to keep it to a minimum, or at least to a point where the reader is going through the book and doesn't get too caught up on those bits of research and information.
I actually wondered about that, of what it's like for you to write a book that could get mired in the mechanical and the mathematical, and yet it includes it, but it's nothing that will hold up the average reader, that you can say, okay, I understand this. This is what is happening here.
Yeah, well, so as I mentioned, I'm really bad at math. And if someone gave me a novel and said there's math in it, I wouldn't read it. I would be like, oh no. So it's not really mathematical conundrums here. It's really, for me, it's about the poetry of higher math. It's about the concept of what that means, and the kind of elegance and beauty that this holds for Mike Brink, and also the kind of wonderful nature of human genius. I was really inspired by The Queen's Gambit, the show on Netflix about a chess genius, because it was so elegantly done. I felt like I was right there with her, and it was about her struggle with herself and what was going on in her head, rather than about the actual math or the chess.
You also write, and again, it's hard to talk about without giving anything away, and I don't want to do that, but you also have a hell of a villain in here. I mean, there's good villains, really like fantastic villains throughout the book.
Yeah, there's a villain named Jameson Sedge. He is a really intelligent, driven tech guy who has amassed a fortune, and he's interested in cryptography and in computer networks and blockchain and crypto and all of that. And he becomes this nemesis for Mike Brink. And he's a formidable enemy. I think that when you write a book like this, one that has like great stakes, right? Like, the stakes are very high for Mike Brink here. You have to have an enemy or a villain that's of equal caliber. And I found one with Jameson Sedge, I believe.
When you find that your cast of characters, and you realize where they're going to be and what their roles are, that must be very exciting to then set it up as to how it's all going to play out.
Oh, so exciting. And it takes a while to get there. As a writer, part of the fun is finding those characters. The other part of it, though, is writing them across 350 pages and making them completely understandable and relatable or scary or whatever their role is. So yeah, I mean, having a hero like Mike Brink and a villain like Jameson Sedge and a kind of hero, anti-hero like Jess Price, and then having all of that historical information to sort of buoy them was so fun to watch it play out. Of course, there's moments as a writer where you're biting your nails and you're like, is this actually going to, is this all going to come out the way that I wanted to? So I spent a lot of time working out those elements, writing and rewriting and getting it just right.
When do you know that you have achieved as close as you feel you're going to get to that?
Oh God, Joe, like really the end, like before they're
Yeah.
going to publish it. So we were, I think, in second past pages when I cut 30 pages from the book. There was one section that was dragging and I was like, we need to make this go faster. And I cut pages out. So I'm really working on it right until the last minute. And believe me, if you gave me the manuscript now, I would probably go through it with a red pen and fix more. That's just the kind of writer I am. I really think that it's never finished. I mean, luckily they take it, they rip it out of your hands and then they print it and it's done. Then you have to go on to the next book, which I'm doing now. But I think it's part of part of my artistic process to keep at it and keep making it better, but it's also being in love with those characters. I'm kind of envious of the readers out there who get to read about Mike Brink for the first time, because now he's sort of living in my head, and I would like to know what it feels like to just meet him for the first time.
And also, we should mention you've got a great protagonist, you have a great anti-hero, you have a great villain, and you need a dog, and you and you have Conundrum, and Conundrum's a very cool dog.
Oh, I love Conundrum. Conundrum is a dachshund. She's Mike Brink's companion. She is something of an emotional support animal for him, and she's with him everywhere. He calls her Connie, and she's obviously one of my favorite characters in the book. And nothing bad can happen to Connie because we all love her too much.
It seems like you almost established that from the beginning. That okay,
Yeah,
the dog's going to be in danger, but don't worry, everything will be fine
don't
with
worry.
the dog.
Yeah, we're going to protect Connie through everything.
Mike is such an interesting character because he often seems befuddled, even though there is this higher power that he has. And I find that interesting because he does have to check in with other people sometimes to see how things are viewed through, quote unquote, a normal lens.
Totally. I mean, so the thing about Mike Brink that's interesting is that his therapist in the book, and real therapists out in the world whose work I've read, call what he has an island of genius. He has this one sort of particular narrow island of genius that is incredible, that other people can't do what he does, but the rest of his life is pretty normal. So when you're given when there's a chasm between talent and then living like a normal person, it creates some confusion and befuddlement. But I find that area exactly the interesting point with him. I think if he was someone who was, more like Sherlock Holmes, although I have to say Sherlock Holmes was taking laudanum, and had a dark side too. But if he was a character who was just 100% on all the time and a complete genius in every element of his life, he would be boring. So yeah, I love that part of him, and that's the thing that makes me want to explore that character more.
Danielle Trussoni is our guest in this week's book show. The name of the novel is The Puzzle Master. It is just out from Random House. The areas that you visit are really interesting. The characters do travel all over the world, but the novel has a pretty good grounding in New York and the Hudson Valley, including all the way up to the Adirondacks. And there, of course, the Morgan Library is in the book and is a real place. But places like Sedge House, that also is based on a real house.
It is. It's based on Wilderstein. Have you been there? It's in
I have.
south of Rhinebeck, right?
Yeah.
And when I was writing that section of the book, I had the idea for that house. It's a Gilded Age mansion, big sprawling, beautiful place right on the banks of the Hudson River. And I had the idea for this house, but I wasn't exactly sure what it would look like. So I went to Wilderstein, and I was given a tour, took lots of pictures, took lots of notes, got all the history about the different rooms. I mean, there's some amazingly beautiful elements to that house, and I transposed those into the book. But really, I did go to almost every location that you find in the book. The Morgan Library, as you mentioned, is one of my favorite, and there's a couple of chapters set there. And I was able to just really go in and look at this incredible library. And, there's some secret doors in the library. I don't know if you've been there and seen them. And the tapestries and just the amazing stuff. And it's right in the middle of New York City. I've hustled by that spot like many times without going in. And just going in, it's like entering another universe.
When you see these places, even I think Bard's Fisher Center, the Frank Gehry designed Bard Fisher Center, plays a role, as well as Mike is visiting an academic who can be of assistance to him, and that really gives it a sense of place, but also a natural progression of things, of like, oh yeah, let me go find the smart people and ask them about what's going on.
Well, the book is, it was called by Kirkus a brainy thriller, so which I love, right? I mean, I think that's
not a
really
bad
great
thing.
Yeah, it's a great way to describe it. And I am not someone who likes to read books that it's just like start at point A and you get pinballed around without any rhyme or reason or sort of an intellectual underpinning to the story. I like to have, as you say, a progression, a build of not only action and tension and character, but of a sort of intellectual layering, so that by the time you get to the end, this puzzle and this experience leaves you changed. And I have lived in New York City and upstate. I spend a lot of time driving around New York State, and places like the Fisher Center, Wilderstein, the Morgan Library, the Adirondacks. These are really important to me, and I wanted to put them in the book and to represent them in a way that readers who live in this area are like, I'm home.
Yeah. You mentioned this earlier, that Mike Brink will be in the next novel. And did you know that going in, that you wanted to write a series, or did that come at the end of, oh, wow, there's so much more I can do with this character?
Well, it's kind of both. It happened when I started to get really involved with the character of Mike Brink. So it was as I was writing the first book, I thought, this character has the capability to carry another mystery after this one. I feel like his strengths and his weaknesses make him interesting enough to go into another mystery. And then also when I finished this book, and when they finally ripped it from my hands and put it to press, I missed him, and I missed the process of writing about him. And so I started immediately writing the second book. So it's a little bit of both. I thought he would be, a strong enough character, but I also just think he's complicated and interesting enough for me personally to want to spend time writing about him.
Is it something that when you give a character like this the condition that Mike has, plus the of what he is really good at, and think, okay, I'm gonna be in the thriller genre, there are many, many, many directions to go in, I would think, for you.
Oh, so many directions. But, for me, there's a couple of elements that I'm most interested in and that keep me on track, I think, in the direction that I'm going. One is being true to that character. I'm not going to go off in some direction that isn't that doesn't feel natural for him. The second is my own interest in sort of, I don't want to say intellectual history, but like in excavating ideas. So every book that I write is going to have a very layered sort of history of ideas element to it. I'm not someone who likes to read thrillers that are just about like bank heists or, who gets kidnapped and returned or who falls in love with who. I like to have stories that are larger than me and bring me to places that I haven't been before and make me think things that maybe I wouldn't have thought before. And so Mike Brink will be going on more adventures. The next book is actually set in Japan, and has to do with a puzzle box. And that, as I'm writing it, those are the elements that I'm bringing into it: the history of ideas and an exploration of Mike Brink's consciousness.
You just brought up something that I find fascinating. There is the act of writing the book, but it also seems that even perhaps more important to you is the thinking of the book.
As I said, this is my first, genuine thriller, although I have had plotted elements in all my books, of course. But I came from a very literary fiction tradition. My first book was a memoir about my relationship with my father, who was a Vietnam vet. Plotting and those sorts of stakes that are in a thriller weren't there. But what it was about was the idea of what war does to a family. My father was a veteran, and I grew up with watching him struggle with PTSD. And then, my next book, Angelology, was also a kind of excavation of ideas, biblical ideas. And so I'm just very interested in that. And what's changed, I guess, with this book is that the form has changed. It's become faster. It's become, more of, a recognizable genre in the thriller. But the writing, the literary writing and the interest in ideas is always there. And for me, those are the best books those are the books that I like to read. Something that draws me in, keeps me reading, but also makes me think.
Has it changed your personal relationship with puzzles?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yes, I realize now how complicated they are to make. I worked with two puzzle constructors, these really genius men. Wei Wong, who is a 4-time puzzle champion, and Brendan Emmett Quigley, who is a crossword puzzle genius. They helped me make puzzles that I put in the book. And so as I was doing that, as I was working with them, I saw how complicated it is. I saw their process, and it made me respect the process of making these things so much. It's a little bit, as I said earlier, like writing a novel, right? There's this process that you don't, if you're not a novelist, if you're reading the book, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes and how complicated that is, but it's there. And the same with puzzles.
The name of the new novel is The Puzzle Master by Danielle Trussoni, and it is published by Random House. Thanks to our producer, Sarah LeDuc. Write to us at book@wamc.org. The latest on national production programs is available via the Airwaves newsletter at wamc.org and on social media at WAMC Radio. Bookmark us for next